Welcome to Wellthing Talks. I am your host, Alicia Castillo Holley, bringing you real-life conversations from Silicon Valley or somewhere around the world. We will talk about disruptors, angel investments, venture capital, and of course, family offices. Join me along with my children, their families, friends, disruptors, and investors as we explore the fascinating world of creating wealth in a completely different and authentic way. Hello, everyone. This is Alicia Castillo Holley with another very, very exciting podcast at the Wealthy Group. Nathan, Ben, I am so happy to have you in the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise.
So I invested in Nanochon many years ago, but this podcast is about you. And the first question is, how did you get here? How did you get to where you are right now? What happened?
Well, I think Nathan should start this off because really it was Nathan's original work in the lab and his vision that created the backbone of the company. So I'd love for Nathan to kind of still tell the research story, and then I can kind of talk about how we've grown the company.
Yeah, sure. So just kind of a quick background of myself and my studies. So, I did my undergrad and my master's at the University of Texas at El Paso in biomedical engineering, focusing on 3D printing. And then, after finishing my master's, I wanted to continue my studies because I always had that, that intent and that desire for pursuing a doctoral studies or graduate level work. So by pure happenstance, I was perusing, I think it was some job website like Indeed or something like that, and I saw a posting or an announcement from Dr. Zhang at George Washington University looking for a PhD candidate. So I applied to her. She was building up her lab there at GW as a new assistant professor. And I should say that the time that I started and shortly after I did, Ben started as well, it was a very fortuitous time that we both joined GW, because at that time they were really investing heavily in science and engineering, as well as in commercialization and tech transfer. So, we really started at an optimal time in our careers, as well as in our, both academic and professional careers. But my background was, always in additive manufacturing, and the focus, because of personal injury to my knees and to other joints, I had that inherent desire to try to create a remedy for not only myself, but something that could impact the greater population. So when I joined GW, I introduced 3D printing / additive manufacturing to the group. Ben joined shortly thereafter, focusing, on taking these additive manufacturing techniques and implementing design cues that could be used for scaffolding and for tissue regeneration. As we progress through our academic studies, Ben, I don't want to speak for Ben, but he was so inspired by the work that we were all involved with that he continued for his PhD as well. And then towards the end of both of our courses of study, we participated in the NSF I-Corps program because we generated some IP from the work that we both independently were doing, and applied to and participated in the local NSF I-Corps program there within the DC, Maryland, and Virginia cohort. And Ben excelled in that program. I was kind of the bookend of it. That the goal for this 10-week program was to do a lot of customer discovery, to really vet your technology and see if it has commercial potential. So you had to go out and interview, people from different aspects of the entire ecosystem from manufacturers, clinicians, and users. So, Ben far exceeded, most expectations, and ended up being the star of the cohort. And I kind of as I mentioned, was the bookend. So I didn't really was still trying to develop that entrepreneurial acumen of getting out the door and then really talking to people without falling back on the science and the technology. So at the end of that 10-week period, we decided to combine efforts, and essentially that became the core, I would say, milestone moment for he and I joining forces. And then we licensed some of that technology, which we had envisioned potential commercializing, but as we proceeded through developing the company and developing what is now our core technology, that evolved over time. And what we're commercializing now was really work that I did at the later stage of my PhD, where we were both looking at different materials approach to addressing cartilage repair in articulating joints. And one of the analogies that we like to use is most companies are trying to fill a pothole with Jello. So if you liken your,
What are you filling the pothole with?
but we're filling the pothole with something more analogous to what is already there. So some asphalt, definitely not as hard as concrete, but something that's more conducive to the mechanics of its native state, and also that has the capability to elicit tissue to grow. So that is really where what started Nanochon in earnest. And Ben and I were talking not too long ago about how this is our 9th year that we founded the company, almost going to be a decade long effort. And we definitely would not be here without Ben's leadership, especially in the early days, where I'm sure he's eager to share the trials and tribulations that went on with that.
Well, we're going to talk more about troubles and tribulations, but Ben, your turn. How did you get here?
So I think kind of like Nathan, I was looking for opportunities. I was looking for ways to get into this tissue engineering space. And I think also fortuitously, I saw that Dr. Zhang was actively advertising and recruiting for her lab. I think unlike Nathan, though, I had no exposure prior to joining the lab at GW. I started my career as a mechanical engineer. I knew I had an interest in biomedical engineering and biomedical science, but after 4 years of mechanical engineering undergrad, I was really sick of school. So I went to work for, a big design build construction firm. So the kind of company that, employs engineers to design critical systems and, pieces of large building projects. And I think after a week on the job, I realized I'd made a grave mistake. So, I spent the next 2 years at that company and in that position, but also pretty critically thinking about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And, I decided to, kind of take the plunge and go back for a master's in biomedical engineering. And again, didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I applied to a variety of different programs. And it just so happened that GW was the program that had a tissue engineering investigator or focus that I got into. So it was kind of a no-brainer. Well, that seems more interesting than some of the other places I had applied. And that's where I'm going to end up. And, I'm going to also flatter Nathan and give him a lot of credit here because, I started in the lab as a master's student. He was, I believe, already a PhD. I'd never done any academic research. I'd never worked in a lab, let alone a biomedical lab. My only exposure to these topics was through coursework. So I'd taken a couple material science classes and a biomedical engineering class as an undergrad. And, Nathan really helped me with my early projects. I mean, really mentored me and, helped me become a better, more effective scientist. And to Nathan's point, he's also the one who really got me interested in 3D printing, because at the time the lab was sort of exploring a variety of other types of tissue engineering, other ways to kind of make these materials or make these scaffolds. But Nathan was the one who kind of said, hey, a lot of people are starting to pay attention to this 3D printing thing. We should really explore it more deeply. And together we actually published the first 3D printing focused paper, out of Grace's lab. And now I believe virtually all of her projects are 3D printing focused. So, really became a direction for the whole lab, off of that early success that we had. But, to Nathan's point, we did that project and I published that paper, which kind of became my master's project. But I knew I wasn't done after that. My original plan was, okay, I'm going to get a master's, then I'm going to go work for Boston Scientific or Medtronic and kind of have a typical, white collar career at a medical device company. And really through working with Nathan and working with Dr. Zhang, fell in love with the research. So, transferred over to the PhD track. And then that was the point at which, like Nathan said, I really got interested in entrepreneurship because GW was putting a lot of resources to it. They had really kind of overhauled their tech transfer office, and they had adopted iCore as sort of a tech transfer approach and an entrepreneurial training program. So we went through that. And again, like Nathan said, we both kind of had competing projects. And I think, it became very clear that Nathan was the better scientist, but I was the one who could pound the pavement and talk to the surgeons. And if anybody's listening who doesn't know what iCore is, really focuses on taking scientists and engineers and technical people, basically inventors of technology, and forcing them to talk to who they think their customer is and learn what the customer actually wants so they could build that technology into an actual product, and sort of understanding the difference between technology and product. And, that really lit a fire in me, and it made me know that I really wanted to do a startup, after finishing the PhD. So like Nathan said, we had a couple more years in our program after doing that initial iCore, continue to sort of refine what we thought would be the technology and what we were thinking would be the product. And then we were actually lucky enough to get into the national level iCore that the NSF directly runs. So I think it was literally right after I graduated in 2016, we went through that program. And that's where we kind of transitioned from scientists that had some idea that this should be in joint health. And, we had, frankly, like a whole tool bag of technologies we were going to package together into something really complicated. And it really helped us focus on, this area of sports medicine. So treating this type of cartilage damage in younger patients that are, perhaps a decade or more away from actually needing or even qualifying for a knee replacement. And then also to Nathan's point, it helped us really understand the landscape of what we were competing with. And I thought he spoke to that very, very well, that, even now, the majority of things that are either used clinically or in development are these sort of like things that fill the pothole with Jello. And we have something that's a lot more structural, and then also integrates much better with the tissue over time. So you actually repair the road rather than just having a temporary fix that is gonna fail in the short term. So, I think along the way, like that kind of takes you to 2017, 2018. I think what that type of rigorous customer discovery helped us do was it really helped us pursue pre-investor funding. So iCore really sets you up well for NSF grants. And now NIH also looks to a lot of that type of customer discovery. But at the time, it was really just NSF that put a lot of weight on that. And we were able to get an SBIR that allowed us to do a study in large animals to really show that the platform could work and could have the potential to translate to humans. And then with that data, we were able to then recruit investors and raise our first round, which Wealthing was involved in and actually has invested several times since that round as well, because that certainly wasn't the last round that we raised or that we will ever raise. And then fast forward to today, I mean, we kept doing these studies to demonstrate the technology's power, but also show its potential for efficacy in this specific clinical application. And we're now at the point where we're weeks away from treating the very first human patient.
So
So
tell us what Nanochon does, because I haven't told the people.
Oh, yes, of course. So Nanochon, we're an early stage medical device company. We've developed an off-the-shelf implant for treating what are referred to as focal cartilage defects, which are essentially potholes in the cartilage surface of a joint. They can be caused by trauma, but they're very commonly associated with osteoarthritis. So in the early stages of the quote unquote osteoarthritic disease, the reason why people develop pain and stiffness in their joints is because these actual potholes develop in the cartilage surface. And then over time, those potholes worsen. The bone underneath the cartilage starts to degenerate as well. And then also other tissues in the joint can break down. And this is what happens over many, many years, and what eventually leads people to needing a total joint replacement. So our goal was to develop a product which could treat patients younger, as I said, when they're perhaps a decade or more away from actually needing a knee replacement, and actually have the potential to not only deliver better short-term outcomes, meaning recovery time and return to activity, but also have the potential for real longevity. Because right now in clinical treatment of these patients, the standard of care fails within 2 years and they have to go in for another surgery. And those revision surgeries, if they're not at the point of needing a knee replacement, are extremely costly and very hard to implement. Things like tissue grafting, harvesting tissue from cadavers, and there's even some cell therapy products on the market, which kind of sound like science fiction, but they've been around since the early 90s. So, there's a tremendous need for innovation in the space, and the patients are continuing to suffer with this condition. I mean, it is still being called the holy grail of orthopedics if you can effectively treat cartilage damage in these younger patients. So that's Nanochon, and that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, my dad had a knee replacement, and he didn't have the other knee replacement because where he lived, they just had a shortage and they couldn't deliver it, so he only had one. But he was really funny about it, and he had a shorter kneecap than what he needed, so it created all sorts of things with that, and he was deaf and blind. So I mean, just added, it was just extremely interesting to say the least. But he was very funny, so he. Yeah, he used to walk around with a walker, holding the walker up, because the main reason why he used the walker was not for balance, was because he didn't want to bump into things, and the joystick was not good enough for his knee. So it's really interesting to see how he's like, okay, I'm going to do this, and figure out. But I want to go back to some of the stories that you told. So I want to ask you two questions. One was there a time where you thought we're not going to be able to make it? And was there a time where you thought, oh my gosh, we are going to do this? It's happening. So was that any one of those milestones that you lived?
Well, I'd love to hear what Nathan has to say first, and then I'm happy to give you my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the perpetual optimist, but also definitely a realist. So,
those
not to
things
say
usually don't go together.
Yeah, they're in most cases they're competing ideas, but I was an optimist because I believed in what I saw in what the lab. So Nanochon, we really promote ourselves as being a data-driven company. So whatever the data, whatever the test, the lab results give us, whatever the test results give us, is what we're promoting and what we're quote unquote selling. We're not in the position of overhyping and overselling what the capabilities of the technology are. So in that regard, I was definitely very optimistic about what we had had developed and were on the pathway to developing. I was realistic in the fact that after finishing my PhD, we had already funded the company, but we hadn't secured much funding. So I had to go and kind of do, as I referred to, my plan B efforts, which was the postdoctoral route. So that basically led me to my first postdoc appointment in Australia. So, I selected my postdoctoral positions really with the emphasis of keeping abreast on what would be directly related and relatable to what Nanochon is doing. So the lab that I joined in Australia um, is led by Dr. Dietmar Hutmacher, who is the pioneer in scaffold-based tissue engineering. So we definitely, it's one of the core principles of what Nanochon is developing. So, I was involved there. I was also involved in direct translation of 3D printed implants for clinical use. So one of our major patients was a 26-year-old male patient who suffered a severe work injury, resulting in resection of almost 80% of his left tibia. So I was part of the design team, and we designed the 3D printed implant that was then manufactured by a company co-founded or partially supported by Dietmar by the name of Osteopore, and then essentially implanted. So that was my first real seminal moment and experience. And that's really what kind of both opened my eyes to how realistic this could be as a potential venture. And then also with the fact that, Ben, while I was overseas, and then even upon my return back to my second appointment at NIST and then my last appointment at UC Irvine, Ben was really, really, actively fundraising, really building up the story of Nanochon and our technology. All the while, we were collecting data, we were being very, very efficient and very mindful of our expenditures. And really, one piece of advice I would give to, a lot of the, people entering the startup space is, to be very lean and efficient and to be very meticulous with the type of data that you're contracting out, because obviously neither Ben nor I had access to an academic facility, which for all intents and purposes can be a cost-saving effort in terms of progressing the science behind your technology. But then once you've lost that access, and then you have to actually pay for private labs to do this type of work, it can get really, really expensive, and you can essentially be throwing money in the wind at basically data that's not going to really add value from a commercial standpoint to your technology. So we were very efficient there. Thankfully, Ben was able to close our larger round of funding, which allowed me to be full-time employed with Nanochon. And that was really, I think, my most realistic moment of saying, yes, we're at a point where we are going to make it.
Great. This is happening. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I really loved what Nathan said about how we were able to continue to build the story and craft the story and kind of get credibility with investors. I think from my side of the table, I also started with some kind of postdoc-like positions, but I was lucky enough in that the funding for one of those came directly from a Nanochon grant. So actually, before we got the SBIR, I had gotten this basically research funding with a surgeon partner at Children's National. So that allowed me to be paid something like at a postdoc level, but it was work that was directly applied to Nanochon. So I think that was a huge benefit, that I was able to get that funding that was directly tied to our research interests, and that basically created the body of foundational translational research. It was essentially the first animal study. It was a rodent study. And that's what allowed us to, then be competitive for the SBIR. But like so many companies, we actually did face the so-called valley of death between the end of that grant project and actually securing that first institutional investor round that Nathan mentioned. And, we'd completed the grant project, and I was spending all my time going to pitch events and pitching investors. This is pre-pandemic, so this is still when everything was in person. There was no virtual anything. So I was on a plane or a train almost every week for about 9 months leading up to the end of 2019, and we started to get some real traction, and it was looking like we were actually going to maybe get some real interest from people writing checks. And then we all know what happened in early 2020. So the pandemic happened, everything shut down. And I think for me, that was a moment where I truly thought, wow, we could be done. Basically going into that summer, all conversations had ceased, all activity had ceased. I mean, everybody, frankly, was just trying to figure out how to survive. The pandemic was raging on, and I truly didn't know what we were going to do. And maybe Nathan doesn't remember this, but I always remember this conversation that we kind of started to talk about. Okay, maybe if we get to the end of 2020, we're going to close up the company because neither of us can just continue to do nothing. I think Nathan was on his third postdoc, and very understandably was ready to do something else or something more substantial if the company wasn't going to hit. So we kind of had those discussions about let's ride it out to the end of 2020 and see what happens. But what I came to appreciate was that we were a very small company that had completed grant funded research project and really didn't have anything else that was putting resource strain on the company. We didn't have a big payroll. We didn't have space. We weren't trying to produce anything. It's not like we were halfway through a clinical trial that had to get shut down. And I really engaged a lot with the sort of like peer CEO community during that time. And I think that the struggles that a lot of people were having, I just realized were not our struggles. And even though it was very psychologically stressful to just kind of sit around and wait and feel like we were doing nothing, we were in a position to be able to do that. And so toward the end of 2020, when investors started to, kind of poke their heads out again, we're resuming conversations, and there was talk of opening the pipelines back up. We started to resume some of the conversations that we've been having in late 2019, and actually connected with the investor that became the lead investor for our seed round. So in early 21, those conversations started to really take shape, and we moved into a real diligence process. And I think by the spring, we actually had a term sheet from that investor. So we were able to go out with that. And then by the fall of 21, we actually didn't just have a filled round, we had an oversubscribed round. And I think, what we saw was that all this work that we put into the technology, as Nathan said, focusing on the right kinds of studies that would de-risk and build value, and then also continue to refine the story behind the company and our vision for the product. We really started to see the benefit of all that hard work, and were successful in raising that first round. Although I will say, to answer your other question, when did I know that we had made it? I'm still not 100% sure that I know that, but we then faced our second enormous macroeconomic challenge, which is that we were getting ready to raise a Series A in the beginning of 2023. We were in talks with five potential investors to lead like a 10 million Series A. All of them pulled out but one. They were getting close, I think, to issuing a term sheet, and then the Silicon Valley Bank collapse happened, and then they were like, "Yeah, we gotta shut stuff down, and maybe we can talk in the fall." So again, we were kind of in this position of, oh, well, what are we going to do? And now we did have, resource stresses. We had an ongoing, basically the large animal study that would enable us to get through regulatory bodies to start a clinical trial. We were like halfway through that. Nathan and I were now drawing salary. We had some other people on the payroll. So then we were kind of like, well, what are we going to do? And I ended up getting connected with this venture group called Cultivate MD, which is definitely an early stage investor. I think they'll tell you, I don't want to put words in their mouths, but I think they'll tell you they don't want to be the first money in, but they want to be like the second money in. So they're a relatively large investor, writing checks from anywhere from $1 million to like 10 million, sometimes in later stage rounds. And they were very heavily focused in orthopedics. They are medical device only, so they're not doing any pharma, they're not doing any biotech. They only do medical device, and they have a particular interest and success track record in orthopedics. So, I got connected with them kind of early in 23, and conversations with them kind of picked up towards the end of the year. And the one of the managing partners wanted to come out and meet with me in person. We were getting pretty close, I think, to closing a deal, but he wanted to come out and meet with me in person. We were still in the J Labs at the time, so he flew to DC. We got lunch, and I showed him around the J Labs, and we had our printer, and I had some prototypes of the device, and I was kind of showing him all the toys. And he just kind of turns to me and he goes, "So Ben, when did you know that you had made it?" And I kind of just looked stunned. And I just kind of said to him, frankly, well, I didn't know that I had made it yet. But honestly, I think that was the moment which I knew we were really doing something right, and we were really on a tangible path to success, because an investor like that knew the space so well, had so much experience, both positive and negative, saw what we'd done, saw that value add research we had done, but also really saw the vision, saw the market need, and basically just said, "Yep, you check all the boxes. This is exactly what we're looking for." And they continue to be a tremendous partner to us. So that was, I think, no one had ever asked me that before, but I think that was the moment that I knew, where I'm being asked the question, so it must be true.
If there is, take a second or two to reflect upon this. If there is one lesson that you've learned through managing Nanochon to what it is today that you didn't know when you started, just one lesson, what would that lesson be?
Sure. I think for me personally, it's that you can't do it alone. I think there's so much hype, and there's so much storytelling around being an entrepreneur and being a CEO, and it's such a cult of personality, and there's so many big egos that want to be tech CEOs. But the reality is, even at the beginning stages, you cannot do it alone. And as the company grows, you will need more and more people to join your team and help you, especially if you're a young entrepreneur or a first-time entrepreneur. Right now, I think the most important people at the company are our clinical support team, my clinical study director and her support colleague, because as Nathan said, we've had some exposure to clinical trials in a limited way, but we've never run clinical programs. We've certainly never run them all the way to getting marketing approval. So that's been so essential to have them on board. And I mean, even having so much experience in their industry and knowing how to negotiate contracts with hospitals, knowing how to put together packages for regulatory bodies, even beyond what a typical regulatory consultant can advise you in doing. It's just been so critical. And so I would say you can't do it alone, and there's no point at which you will be able to do it alone.
Great. What about you, Nathan?
No, yeah, I definitely would agree wholeheartedly with Ben, in the fact that very few, if any, technology that I've heard of ever makes it with just one person steering the ship.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, one other piece of advice I would like to give, and it's something that I is what germinated the idea of Nanochon, is to take risks. Don't be afraid to take a risk. With Nanochon, the risk that that I personally took was going out and actually finding an alternative material that would meet the needs that we had, we've just, discussed of what Nanochon presents. So, the initial work I supported myself by going out and buying it and doing all the work myself. Not so much because I kind of foresaw the potential, so much as to quell my own curiosity, because you want to take a calculated risk, as I like to say.
Mm-hmm.
So you never know what the outcome is, but if you're unwilling to at least put the effort to try, then you'll never know, right? And that's what led to us creating Nanochon, and something that I carried over when I was at QUT in Australia, where I was having trouble convincing the powers that be to support some of my ideas, and I went across the street to the local grocery store and bought some stuff myself and did, experimented in the lab. So, definitely, uh, don't be afraid to take that risk, because, a lot of people are afraid of failure because they assume that they're going to fail. So why even try? I definitely try to instill this mentality to, not only my close friends and family, but also, my son, is that you won't know the outcome unless you try.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, not only is there the desire to find the outcome, but also to accept the outcome. I feel like in academia sometimes, and I don't want to get too off on a tangent, but through the I-Corps program, they really want you to focus on what is commercially viable. And I think that's what differentiates industrial level research to academic research. You can have a theoretically perfect, implant that takes 20 steps to manufacture and will lead to the best cartilage and the most compelling story. But if it's not commercially viable to manufacture, to produce, then you're pretty much, at a standstill. Whereas what is may not be the most elegant is the most practical. And I think what we're developing is something that's truly practical from a commercial and a usability standpoint.
Thank you for that. That's very interesting. I don't know if you know that I'm a scientist that became entrepreneur and then became an investor. And then I went back to academia to understand that trajectory. And to me, the very interesting awareness was that the purpose of academic science is to prove that you're wrong. And the purpose of commercial science is to prove that you're right. So it's so different. And you can imagine if you're an entrepreneur, you go to talk to the investors, say, we're going to advance knowledge because I think we continue proving that we're wrong. So that's not really going to go very far. But I like your trajectory. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, sharing your wisdom, what you learned, the humbleness of just doing the work and realizing that you can do your best, and it still is not, success is not given. You have to work on that. Thank you so much for taking care of our money. I've never said this in a podcast. Because it's all about the people, but I've been, of course, following you forever. And I'm a very happy investor, and I really love what you're doing, and I appreciate you coming here to the podcast. Last words for our audience?
I guess I'll say, like I mentioned, we're getting this first clinical trial going in the next couple of weeks. It's going to be an exciting first half of the year, especially when we start to be able to publish some of that data. So just be on the lookout for that.
Good. Nathan?
Yep. Definitely, as we discussed, we've had a long road full of ups and downs, and the future looks bright, especially with support much like yourself. So we definitely appreciate the confidence, and look forward to having some really exciting news.
An exit.
And an exit for sure.
Absolutely.
So I hope you like this episode. This is a very interesting couple, friends, but foremost business people that know how to complement each other. I met them many, many years ago when they were still in the process of thinking how they could do that, make the suggestion to go for horses, not for just humans. Very, very, just very nice people. And it has been a pleasure. We've invested 4 times and we will continue supporting them in the best way we can. This is again a podcast from the Wellthing Group, and I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you next time. This is Alicia Castillo Holley, your host. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to our Wellthing Talks. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. To stay connected, visit us at wellthing.com. This is Alicia Castillo Holley, your host, and until next time, yours in Wellthing.